وصل صوتك.
I usually take 15 weeks to do what I'm going to try to do, and a lot less than that, so bear with me. But if we're doing some of Indiana's political history, I think it's central for you to know, if you go back to really the founding of this country, and a little bit just before the founding of this country, the first European settlers in Indiana were French. They're involved in the fur trade. So most of the 1700s, if you think about Indiana, it really was a middle ground that was not totally Indian, not totally European, a world in which neither dominated, in which there was negotiation, in which there was give and take, and in which neither culture could completely dominate. That by the time of the Revolution, that middle ground was eroding, and by the time of William Henry Harrison, who was the first territorial governor of the state of Indiana, Indiana was on a path to become a state. Again, one of the unique things about this region is it was the first region set up after the United States became a country. And it was set up in a specific way that the founders and the framers dreamed that this country would be. There was a very regular way to settle land, based on, not on the way the geography actually worked, but just on a grid and on squares. And so if you bought a claim of land, you knew that it was your land, and it wasn't based on there's a tree over there and a creek over there and a ditch over there, but it was mapped out on a plot. Then quickly I just want to get you up to some other legacies that would be important. Many historians will argue that if Oliver Morton was the most important governor of the 19th century, that Paul McNutt, who was a Democrat, was one of the most important governors in the 20th century. And the reason Paul McNutt is significant, this is the New Deal era in the United States, after the stock market crash and the Great Depression. Throughout the country, Democrats were able to forge a coalition of voters that lasted on the national level really up until the late 1960s. McNutt tried to do something similar here in Indiana, but the coalition wasn't as strong, which meant as you moved deeper into the 20th century, he had some short-term reforms and revitalized a party that had been really dormant, but those were more short-term than in other places. And for most of the rest of the 20th century, especially when it came to presidential elections, which we'll talk about later, Indiana began to get a reputation as being solidly Republican, which it enjoys to this day.
And if you're paying attention to the primaries that we just had this past Tuesday, there were 5 states that had them, including Pennsylvania, which is a very, very large state. Trump won all 5 of them. And so he's getting closer and closer. One of the things you may have heard, I believe it was Monday, is this Cruz-Kasich pact. To talk about politics, making strange bedfellows, you have someone like Ted Cruz, who's ideologically a little bit more extreme. He's part of the Tea Party movement. Someone like John Kasich, who tends to be a little bit more moderate, the governor of our neighboring state to the east, Ohio. And what they announced earlier this week was essentially that Kasich was going to suspend his campaign in Indiana. He's not saying you can't vote for him. He did make that clarification in his campaign. But what he's saying is he's not going to actively campaign in the state of Indiana. Instead, Ted Cruz will. Okay? And as a favor in return, Kasich is going to actively campaign in Oregon and New Mexico, and Cruz really isn't going to work on that. Now, why this weird coalition? Why this weird Kasich-Cruz pact? Where I would recommend, I would say Brangelina, if you're familiar with Brad and Angelina, why not merge it? Kasich with a C or Cruz with a K. I think we should start that. As journalists, you have the opportunity to do that. Merge it together so they're one name, just like there's some celebrity couple. Why this weird pact? They're trying to prevent Trump from getting the 1237. That is all they care about. And what's really interesting in both the Republican and the Democratic side is there's really discontentment with the perceived establishment. And that's one of the things that Donald Trump really appeals to a number of voters, typically white, men, lower socioeconomic status, middle class, that feel they've been disenfranchised by the system. Cruz appeals to a number of Hoosiers who are more evangelical, Protestant conservatives. Kasich would appeal to more moderates, maybe more of your establishment, and really interesting because we do share a border. If you look in the Cincinnati area, they also share a media market with Ohio. So not only are we contiguous and we're very close to Ohio, but we actually get a lot of the news in some of those lower areas. So in terms of the presidential race, I think it'll be incredibly competitive and interesting to see, particularly given the fact that with the most recent primaries, Trump won them all. You know, and Kasich and Cruz is obviously second. Kasich's much further behind in terms of delegates, but they're desperately trying to win enough in order to go on and be successful in Cleveland over the summer. For the Democrats, of course, you have Clinton and Sanders. In terms of the most recent primaries, Clinton won 4 out of 5, so she did relatively well. One of the things that's really interesting with the delegate system, for the Democrats in Indiana, they have 83. And you need 2383 to win outright for the Democrats. But unlike Republicans, many of the Republican states were winner take all, and so you could win with 30 or 35% of the vote, which isn't a majority, that's just a plurality. That was one of the things that made Trump very successful. For Democrats, they have this thing called superdelegates. And one of the things that's been really helpful for is the Clinton campaign. And it puts her really above the Sanders campaign in terms of delegate count, though she by no means has the official number to make it through. I think Clinton and Sanders will be very competitive here. Sanders was actually just here yesterday. He visited Purdue and Lafayette and then down in Bloomington for IU. And we do have, when you look at the Indiana Democrats, we do have a lot of union workers. We do have a lot of more moderate Democrats. And we think of union, you'd say, well, Sanders maybe a little bit more in terms of the voters there. But certainly for your more moderates, they would be more interested in Clinton. And so I think those are going to be very competitive races as well.
We have a system where we have a primary system, and when candidates go from state to state, they acquire delegates. So if you win a state, you get a certain number of delegates that go to that nominating convention. Why Indiana is important is because there is no winner yet. Usually at this point in time in previous elections, the winner's been declared like months ago. But because no one has a majority and there is no clear winner, Indiana becomes more important, because whoever wins Indiana, that person is more likely going to go on to be the nominee for president.